So with that, I am going to do a quick introduction to our next speaker, and I'm really, really pleased to turn the baton over to you, Peter. Peter Aiken, how many of you were here at the earlier session that Peter Aiken spoke at? How many of you? Okay, so about half of you in the room here. Then I don't need to do a belabored introduction. Peter Aiken, as you all know, is an author. He's going to talk about the case for the Chief Data Officer, which is a phenomenal topic for our audience today. He is also the president and founder of Blueprint, Data Blueprint, which is an IT consulting organization, and he's the president of DAMA International. And so you heard Suzanne talk a little bit about how we're thinking about leveraging that certification within the competency framework. So it is a pleasure to have you, Peter, and I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you. Thank you.
Christine, thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Thanks.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time again to come out today. You wouldn't be here if you weren't passionate about data as I am, and that's a little weird in IT, isn't it? So we'll skip the introduction stuff. I'll just go through and click this. This is not clicking very fast. There we go. My first computer. Okay, there we go. Age 6, working on Fortran programming with my Uncle Rob, who is still a NASA flight engineer up there. Some of you remember these things, right? Again, I've been in this program a long, long time. I'm not getting a click on this thing. There we go. Spent a lot of time with the Department of Defense doing things. As she said, I'm sort of the worst of all things. I'm a university professor, and usually you don't want a university professor to talk to you about these sort of things because the university tends to be a little bit diverse and divorced from what's actually happening in the real world. Thank you very much on there. On the other hand, some of you are familiar with DAMA International, and this is the professional organization for we who are passionate about data in this. Lots and lots of materials and writing, and what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes is to try and cram down your throats everything that's in the book. So I'm required by OSHA to say fasten your safety belts. I'm serious about that. And let's jump in and see what we can do on this. So, also, we run a webinar that is the third Tuesday of every month and talk about a bunch of topics. This is actually a Wordle, and we're getting to the point of where this is going to be the way our customers are going to want information presented as well. And Christine talked about the integration of different data types. We're also looking at different data presentations and things. What I'm going to talk about today is sort of the real problems that we have. And let me disclaim, first of all, I know this much about P&G, okay? So I'm not talking any internal stories here or anything else. You guys, as far as I can tell, are probably leaps and bounds ahead of most organizations. So I'm going to talk broadly about where things are in industry. If you think some of these things are helpful here, that's terrific. And this is the purpose of this, to go a little bit wide and have some discussions in those areas. But at the same time, when I look across organizations, very, very poor data management practices in general. The reason for that is twofold. One, people don't know what they don't know, and two, they try to treat data like a project, and that's not going to work. Finally, how many of you have had a lot of classes in this from your college and universities? A couple of you, right? That's why you have the competency being developed here, because we in the university community have done a tremendous disservice to the IT profession over the years, because it's largely been T and not quite so much I. So we'll look at the role of a CDO, and I see three particular issues in getting a CDO. First of all, dedicated solely to this process. Secondly, unconstrained by this IT project mindset. IT projects are important and we should use it. I'm not taking anything away from IT by saying that data is not a project. We need to manage IT as a project, but data is not. And thirdly, we do need to report directly to the business, because so much of what we talk about talks about translation back and forth between what's going on in the business and what's going on in IT. And you'll see when we finish up here that there's a lot of these things that really do belong on the business side anyway. So start off with poor data management practices to date, just general industry statistics, failures, partial failures, and successes. So I guess that failure is the new win, right? And it's redefining these things. And again, don't know anything about how it works here at P&G, but overall, most people look at IT projects, and the bigger they are, that means the bigger the messes they are going to create. 1 in 3 projects suffers on price, schedule, and functionality issues on this. When we look at what's happening in the data world too, there's a couple of measures that we can do. And again, being as old as I am, I've been fortunate to be able to work on these things over a 25-year period. So we did a survey back in 1981 when we were looking at which came first. And I hope you all agree that when you look at a business function, you should look at it and the IT group comes in and says, what's going on in this business function? And then you select the appropriate tools to use. Makes sense, right? So when we looked at this in 1981, we found out that 26% were actually buying were forming the data management group first, and most of the group, 68%, were actually buying the technology first and then trying to make the technology work. 6% of them did it simultaneously. Of course, I wouldn't be telling you this story if it had gotten better, because that would actually be good news. In fact, it's gotten worse. Now we're down to only 9% of the groups doing the proper analysis work that they need to do and then selecting the tools. And instead, what we're getting are 75% of the organizations are going out and buying the tool first and trying to make the tool fit. So this is not good news. The best practices here, hopefully, are quite obvious on this. When we look at empirical data on how well we do, let me just ask the group, how many of you all have done at least 4 data migrations in your careers? Okay, so I'm seeing a fairly good 2/3 of the room here is raising their hands. When we ask you all how long it takes and how much it costs, you all with 4 under your belt would be considered experienced, and you only underestimate this by a factor of 10. And again, this is not that you guys are wrong. We haven't given you the tools to do this with. But if IT wants to know how long something is going to take and how much it's going to cost, and we give them an answer that's only an order of magnitude off, not good. So it's not all bad news, but what we do have is not enough data management involvement. And as I've surveyed the DAMA groups over the years, we find that when we ask questions like data warehousing, are you an initiative leader? Yellow, are you involved? Or red, are you not involved? There's simply too much red on this chart. I don't know how you can do customer data integration and not have the data management people involved in this. And yet we see it over and over and over again. Now here's a chart that's designed to blow your mind. This is if we had time to sit here for a couple of hours, I would walk you through what we mean by the intricacies and the science behind what data management is. But we don't have time for that, so I'll give you the high-level management version. It's 5 functions. First function is making sure we're all singing off the same sheet of paper. After all, if you hear a barbershop quartet, you want to hear them perform. You don't want to hear them rehearse. And yet, again, in IT, data management seems to be isolated groups trying to do the right thing without the real synergy that can occur when you get a team-based approach to this. Second function is organizational data integration. As you look around the organization, these parts of the organization, whether it is program to program, whether it is part of the organization to another part of the organization, or whether it's between our organization and our partner organizations, we are transferring data at high speeds. The automation that occurs in this makes this doubly important. We need to manage the process of sharing data across boundaries. And it turns out when you examine this, that a lot of this stuff is redundant, so you can achieve some very good savings in these areas. Third category, if it's everybody's problem to improve data quality, what happens to it? It's everybody else's problem, exactly right. On the other hand, the minute it says, Peter, your next raise depends on you achieving a significant measurable improvement in the quality of this data, I'm going to pay attention to it, and so are your data stewards. So data stewardship is about personalizing this area in here. Data development is about delivering data systems. In the past, this has always meant to people databases. We now have new things, virtualization, portals, XML, all kinds of things that give us additional options that we don't teach in college and universities. Again, it's a case of not knowing what you don't know. And finally, data support operations means that what we're talking about here are keeping these systems available for our users on a regular basis. So that's what that big chart boiled down to in 5 points means. And unfortunately, if you've been through college and university, you may get some of this. Now, it's not just us that have gone through college and university, but our bosses and our bosses' bosses. The C-levels at all organizations have gone through the same kinds of programs. So what do they learn? They learn this. Data is about databases. And of course, we know that that's not true. It's a lot different from that. Let's talk now about performance and how we measure performance in this area overall. Many of you are familiar with the capability maturity model from Carnegie Mellon University. See some heads nodding in there. Everybody gets 1 point for showing up and signing their name. Great standard, right? If your process is repeatable, you get 2 points. That means we have a process. We don't talk about the quality of the process. We simply have the process. If the process is Suzanne does everything, that still counts as a process. This is a fairly low standard. By the way, not personal. I always have to disclaim that. If we, on the other hand, say to Suzanne, you might hit the lottery one day and decide to not do this anymore, and we ask Suzanne to write a book, she has some documentation, and now we get 3 points. Because once we have that book, we can hand that book to somebody else, and somebody else can now see whether that process is being followed. We now have 4 points for being managed. 5 points if we occasionally sit down and say, how's this working out for us? Could we improve the overall process? Everybody familiar now with the CMM model? So if I take the assessment pieces, program coordination, integration, stewardship, data development, and support, and marry them up with the pieces over here, the capabilities, we can now put together things and say, what's going on? Well, I've looked at more than 500 organizations empirically. A third of them, coincidentally, happen to be governmental organizations. 58% of them are public companies. And I now have enough data, for example, to say that European companies manage their data better than American companies. It's an interesting perspective. It might be because we're much more quarterly driven in the United States, whereas in Europe they say, 4 years isn't a long time, is it? Again, long-term perspectives on these things. What this also means, though, is that I can look at industries, and I was asked by the insurance data management industry to put together a little chart for them on how they are doing. So I took all of the companies that I had looked at from a data management perspective in insurance, and again, here's our scale, here's our areas, and here's our results. The average insurance company does not have repeatable practices anywhere in their data management areas. This tells us why insurance can be such a mess sometimes, and this is a group that can clearly benefit from this type of a process on this. When we look over time at how this is going, here are my results for 2007, and 5 years later, we're not getting better. So again, these are organizational and global statistics, external too. I don't know anything about how you're doing it here, but if you're looking at this and saying we're better than that, this gives you the opportunity to achieve a sustained competitive advantage in the marketplace. And that is something tremendous that organizations are going to take a longer time to get to, because most organizational data, very challenging all the way around, multiple sources. And of course, we have this data tsunami of big data now. Just take the London Games, for example. 60 gigabytes of data generated per second. 200,000 hours of big data generated just to test the systems that are out there. Every day produced a year's worth of video. 845 million Facebook users uploading 15 terabytes each and every day, 13,000 tweets per second. Some of you may remember during the bicycle race, it actually overloaded the system and they had to stop broadcasting at some point. 4 billion people watching and 8.5 billion devices connected. These numbers are enormous. This makes our collective challenge even bigger as we go through this. And yet, some of you remember Maslow from high school. I see some heads nodding out there. This is the idea that if your food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, you're unlikely to be able to do what we call self-actualization up here. That's writing the great American novel, producing a movie, coming up with a brand new business idea. And as long as we are working in data management, we tend to see the same thing happening over and over and over again. We take the 5 data management practice areas, which form the foundation of what we're trying to do. But what gets written about over and over and over again are the cool things that are in this green triangle. Advanced analytics, cloud, all sorts of wonderful stuff up there. By the way, these are wonderful techniques. But if you're trying to do this without doing this, it's going to take you longer, cost more, deliver less, and at greater risk to the organization. So if you are succeeding here, that's terrific. Think how much better it will be if you put in place a good foundation. Even strategy is an area around data that people are not familiar with. When we look at enterprise data strategies, we can look back to Michael Porter and see there are basically 2 areas. Improving your operations. That means trimming costs from the organization in various places. Or innovating. Notice they are not on the same axis. they require different sets of skills. And most organizations are down in quarter one, as you've already seen by the data that I've presented to you. They're little or no proactive data management. And going here is a great place to go, because once you are here, now you can start to say, how can I do this faster, better, cheaper, at less risk to the organization? As opposed to going to here. And again, the idea is that most organizations here try to go straight to here. You can do this, but it will take longer, cost more, deliver less, at greater risk to the organization than if you're doing it. And some of the organizations that I've worked with over the years say, hey, we can go straight to here. I hope you see that this is a crawl, walk, run type scenario. And that is the advice that we're giving most organizations, because only 1 in 10 organizations even has a board-approved data strategy. If you don't have a strategy, then where you're going doesn't make a whole lot of difference, does it? Here's an example from a customer that we've worked with over the years. And just to let you know how Data Blueprint works, we tend to go into a company and we do project work. We don't want to put people in seats and have become part of the organization. We want to teach the organization how to do this on their own. So this is a $1 billion+ chemical company, a little smaller than you guys, but still they develop a lot of different products, and they're trying to make the fuels burn longer and the engines run smoother and the machines lasting longer. They've got about 100 chemical PhDs that would fill this auditorium with people who are fairly expensive resources. And as they do this, they run tests annually over and over and over again at a cost of up to $250,000 per test. But they keep no historical data on this. So they don't know when they've done a test before and when they've done a test similar to this. Now, we put this one chart together and they said, fine, you can stop. This actually documents their workflow process that they're doing. And we said, well, that's good. We're glad that you understand that we understand what it is that you do. But let's take a look at some of the problems. Now, anybody in this room could solve this problem: manual transfer of digital data. That is, they're going from one machine and they're moving it to another. Now, you guys can all hook up networks and things. Again, it's just a digital infrastructure that you want to put in place. There's manual file duplication or movement, NikeNet, if you will. Manual data duplication when it comes in. Synonym reconciliation. Oh, every time I get this one from Fred, I have to change these pieces here. Or tribal knowledge. Yeah, every time the data comes in from Rome, we have to do it this way. Okay? Well, these are good things to know, but it turns out when you add up all of these, oh, and by the way, anybody recognize the icon here? Fox Pro? Yeah. Not exactly a sustainable information technology on this. More importantly, though, the 100 PhDs were spending 80% of their time doing manual, non-value-added data management techniques. Yes, there's a tremendous improvement in productivity that can be gained there. And as part of the solution, we started to integrate these pieces, pull together just to look at reduced expenses, improve competitive edge, time and savings, and $25 million in savings just the very first year on their game. If we take their productivity, which about 20% of their time was productive, and just double that, they're still being 60% inefficient. There's a lot more that we can go back in and get a hold of. So let's look at data as not a project right now. Again, this is a natural process. We in the academic community must take full responsibility for this. Organizations start out and have a strategy. The strategy then, they develop some goals and objectives, and as a natural step, they say, what systems should we put in place? I'm going to make an oversimplification. SAP will solve all of our problems, okay? Well, if that's the case, then when we start to put in our network and infrastructure, I need to be talking about SAP here, don't I? And more importantly, when I get to the data, the fuel that we're going to use to fuel this beautiful piece of software that we spent a lot of time and effort putting into, I now have data and information that is SAP-oriented as opposed to business-oriented. Because this ensures the data is formed around the application and not around the organizational processes, that the processes are narrowly formed around the applications, and finally, very little data reuse is possible under these circumstances. My favorite Einstein quote: the significant problems we face can't be solved at the same level of thinking when we were creating them. This is because most organizations, even with package-oriented organizations, don't understand how to use their data architectures. Their data architecture is the only thing that tells you what's happening between the various application packages that you have in your organization. And that's assuming you're not doing a lot of build your own. So we have to understand that assets are economic resources that you own or control and that you turn into some benefit for the organization. Data is your sole non-depletable, non-depreciable, durable strategic asset. The accountants usually wake up on the durable part of that and say, yeah, I understand that. How does that work? With assets, we can formalize the care and feeding. We can put data to work in unique ways. My friend Tom Redmond's done a lot of this. So I want to get you to rethink the pyramid here. Yes, absolutely, we start out with a strategy, and that moves us to goals and objectives. But if we instead next start to work on information layer, organization-wide needs of the information, then the network is only responsible for delivering data to users, which means that your system design process is much simpler in this model than it is the other way. Because now we can develop the data assets from an organization-wide perspective. We can support the information process flows that are already in existence for the organization, and we can maximize our data reuse in this area. Evolving data is different than creating new systems. I know that's what it says up there, but I like to say it anyway. Systems development activities are largely focused on creation of things. You have nothing and you're creating something out of nothing. That is the systems development process. If we look at data, data persists. Data exists in the organizations and it does not get created, it evolves as our data assets. So data evolution is separate from, external to, and it must precede the system development lifecycle activities. This is a huge change, and we've taught nobody this in college and university. I'll show you what we taught them in a little bit, but that's a little bit of a challenge in and of itself. Most people don't really understand what a data architecture is. It's something vague up there in the corner. But if you start to use it right, you have an individual systems development effort, and they have some requirements for it, and you say, give me all the data you have about customer. You'll get back some results from that. That's good. We're happy to have that type of an access. But at the end of our implementation, we put our new systems metadata that we've created out of this new activity, and we move it back up and extend our data architecture and the utility of it. Do this 3 different times, and you'll start to get some very significant results, because over time, of course, the number of requests increases. People start to look to this as this authoritative source. They look at the utility of these results, and finally, the amount of data that you do increases the system development. So we're not going to change this overnight. This is the way we've taught people. This is the way we've socialized it. We've done it for 50 years. It's going to take us some time to move towards this, but it is possible to gradually shift into that. And again, the problems for this fall largely in colleges and universities. This is a knowledge worker organization, correct? And the definition of knowledge worker is somebody who works with data. What do we teach people about data in colleges and universities? Virtually nothing. And how many of them work with it every day? It's the definition of a knowledge worker. Similarly, from an IT perspective, they, if are lucky, they get 1 course, how to build new databases. Now, I do have to ask the question, if we spend 80% of our expenditures in IT enhancing things that already exist, why is it we teach them how to build new stuff when only 20% of their time is dedicated to that? Some of you will be on advisory panels for colleges and universities. I hope you bring that question up to them, because we have a big problem there. Because smart people, our bosses, in this case, collectively, get an impression that data is a technical skill that you use to do new databases. That's what we've taught them. How could we expect them to learn anything but that? They don't know how to do that, and they don't understand that data's unique characteristics, I'll repeat it again, sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset, make it different, and we have to work differently in order to do this. Now, this is the DIMBOK wheel. One of the things DAMA hasn't been good at over the years is marketing. DIMBOK is probably not the way we should have gone on that one, but that's okay. And here's the way I would, if Peter ruled the world, those 2 functions on that DIMBOK wheel would stay with IT. These 2 functions would be shared with the business, and these other functions here would all report directly to the business. a very different way of organizing data around IT. Suzanne mentioned the CDMP. Do we have any CDMPs in here? We have about 1,200 CDMPs worldwide. So if you guys want to become part of that group, we'd love to talk to you about that and see if that works out within your competency areas as well. So let's talk about the role of the CDO then. How are we going to address these problems? And by the way, I'm taking a contrary position way over extremely on this side because I think we've paid so little attention to it up to this point that we need to be a little extreme in our views on this. When you're asked the question, what is the hardest part of doing requirements? It turns out that the answer is not doing design. In other words, when you start to think about the requirements process, people's minds tend to start solving the problem right away. It is actually the hardest thing to do. And so when we look at what the CIOs and what we've asked these incredibly smart, incredibly talented, incredibly gifted people to do, we're not telling them just to be the chief information officer. We're telling them to make sure the email system doesn't go down, the backup and recovery is fine, SAP is running perfectly well. Oh, by the way, we've got a merger and acquisition going on, so we've got a huge integration challenge going on over here. And if we ask them to do more with data, they can't do it because something else would suffer. We're overloading these individuals. Anything that the CIO does that's not applying data assets to the implementation of organizational strategy is a distraction similar to this, and we've not set them up to succeed. So what this means we have to pay attention to is, what do we mean when we say somebody is a chief? At the C level, we've got different Cs, CXOs we call them. CEO, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Security Officer, Chief Privacy Officer or Process Officer, Chief Operational Officer, Chief Quality Officer, Chief Risk Officer. What are the focus of these individuals? When we look at the chief title, it's the person with the highest authority, the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the kind of thing that we're asking them to do. Your CFO is focused solely on protecting and making sure the financial assets of this organization are available, among other things, to pay everybody. There's lots of other things the CFO does, but they're focused solely on one thing. They don't do bookkeeping, do they? The Chief Risk Officer, similarly, is focused on risks at an organizational perspective. They're not doing software testing. And the Chief Medical Officer is focused on medical issues. They're not doing surgery. So how come the CIO gets stuck with this crazy thing? Just from an infrastructure perspective, which is just one of the many hats that CIOs wear, we're going to be looking at different back-end systems, whether they're integrating clouds into these things, connectivity, telephony, all kinds of things that we have to pay attention to in here. And that's way too much for any human being to possibly do a good job at. Now here's where I get in, and the advisory services also have to share some blame in this area as well. I took the 5 top issues that CIOs have reported they were concerned with, and also the top 5 issues that the advisory services have told them to pay attention to over the past 6 years. And you can see here there's a lot of things. Where are we going to fit data in there? And the answer is very, very difficultly. Again, we have the top finance job, the top operations job, the top marketing job, top sales job, HR, risk, whatever it is we're looking for. And here are the things we've asked the CIO to take care of. Where does the data go? Again, we can try to fit it in there, but let's instead say what we really need to do. We have top jobs at organizations. There's a top organization job, a top finance job, a top marketing job, a top information technology job. We need to have a job that is solely dedicated to the one asset that doesn't deplete, doesn't degrade, is durable, and it stays around for a long time, our data. The top data job then runs the data governance organization, and this data job coordinates very, very closely with the top information technology job and provides insight and guidance to. Authorization for projects should be going this direction because the data assets of the organization are what we are really trying to leverage here. And I don't think a data scientist is the right role for this. I don't know what the discussion has been here, but when we see an IT project gone bad, we call it a science project. So I'm not sure we really want to tout that data scientist role in there in that category. Data scientists are brilliant people that can do really interesting things there, but we have a different set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that we want to put up here at this C level, including getting along with the other C levels. It's been hard enough to work with people at this level all the way around. Here's a really interesting survey that we just finished in February this year. And the part that I'm drawing your attention to here is that people don't think being entrepreneurial is important for being at this top data job level. 30% said it was important. And I look at the next pieces of results that I got, which is that 73% of the CDO functions are less than 1 year old. And we asked them, do they have a budget? Half yes, half no. And do you have a staff? Again, half yes, half no on this. I think entrepreneurialism is something that we really do need to put back into that CDO function in there. We can then look at IT projects and see how this works. Again, our traditional systems development lifecycle. We've all seen this before. I want a swing. It's a very simple concept. I don't understand why it's so long and takes so hard to get there. So a consultant comes in and helps you out with it a little bit. Sure, no problem. Customer explains it. Now we're getting into that translation between business and IT that we really shouldn't have. Project leader kind of gets an understanding of it. Programmers write it. Beta testers start to work with it. Operations installs it. It's credited for operation. Yes, we got it to work. It's delivered too late because you wanted it in the summertime. Project's really well documented, really well supported by the help desk. Customers build for a gold-plated roller coaster. We get the patches to work, and of course all the user wanted was something simple. Now, I actually saw one of these just the other day. That literally was in Monroe Park, which is across the street from my office, and I just, wow. You can't ask for these things to get made up. The real problem with all of this is that in 1959, the year I was born, a guy named Winston Ross, who's one of the foremost software engineers that worked for TRW, was asked a question by a reporter for Look magazine on how do you develop this software stuff. And he explained to them this process, which was, I do software requirements, I do requirements here, and when I get to the point of diminishing returns, I start doing design as a way of proving out and exercising the parts of the requirements that were imprecise and risky. Everybody with me on that? And then I go back and I refine my requirements. And then I go into detailed design when this process gets to be diminishing returns. A lot of iteration back and forth. In 1959, it wasn't considered good practice to go back and show the article to the author. The author of the Look article said, hey, I invented this thing called the waterfall model and presented it to the world as first you do design, first you do requirements, then you do design, then you do code, and then you do test, with no iteration back and forth. And we went and taught 20 years of students with this model. In fact, it wasn't until 1985 when Barry Boehm finally got around to implementing the software model worked, because we know what doesn't flow up waterfall, and that's anything except for salmon. When we look at what happens in the waterfall model, we have this real challenge here. And as far as I can tell, we're still doing requirements by people. So there's going to be some error in there. It's not going to be 50%. I'm not saying that it is, but everybody's agreed, I hope, that there will be some errors in there just because human beings are imperfect. When we look at this, we then move to correct designs built off of those correct specifications. However, we are still humans, and we will introduce some errors into that process. However, if we haven't caught these errors, we will develop correct designs based on incorrect specifications. And of course, the process rolls onward and onward and onward, eventually leading us to the point of developing imperfect products with lots and lots, again, of red in here. This is a problem for us until we proactively manage this. And of course, the other part of it is we want to get the data part right here. Again, it's not going to happen if we do that. And we also know the costs organizationally to this. If we look at an error that costs 1 cent to fix during the requirements process, that same error now costs 50 cents to fix during the design process, $1 to fix during coding, $2 to fix during testing. unit testing, acceptance testing, we're up to $5 now, and if we don't catch it until it's in maintenance, it costs us $20 to catch a 1 penny error. And worse still, 50% of the problems are not detected until after we've passed this space. This is why IT costs so much and what we can do to help it out. But again, data is not a project. It's a durable asset. It has a life of more than 1 year. This gives us the opportunity to compete and to work carefully with this. And you're going to hear my colleague Steve Hoberman come up here and talk about how he has worked with groups that are moving to Agile. Agile works really well if I can go and grab off-the-shelf components and put them in place, data architecture components. That's the way Agile is meant to work. But if you're trying to co-develop your data during an Agile process, it's a very difficult process. Data evolution is measured in years, some measure it in decades. It evolves, it is not created, it is significantly more stable over time than the processes that you have around it. So ready-made data assets are a prerequisite to Agile development. The only alternative is to create additional data silos, which puts you all back out of a team mode and you're individually supporting siloed efforts, which becomes very, very difficult at that point. One more topic on this thing here. Let's talk about where this should reporting in here. Again, outside of IT and the CIO altogether. If you ask the chief data officer to report up through the CIO, we've already seen the CIO has an enormous palette that they have to deal with, a portfolio that is just phenomenally more complex than any other chief officer that we have. And what ends up happening is that people don't know what they don't know, and they make bad decisions about data. Again, I'm not speaking personally here. I don't have any knowledge in this particular instance, but we see it happen over and over and over again. They should be in the same reporting structure as the CFO and the other top jobs that manage assets. And they should focus on activities that are outside of and upstream from systems development activities. Again, IT doesn't feel the true impact of poor data management practices. The business feels that impact. So let's put those people over on the business side so we don't have to translate them through an IT reporting structure in order to do this. They don't know how business rules are used. That's the reason we call them business rules, because we're looking at them from over here in IT. If we're working at them in the business side, what are they? It's the language we speak. It's natural. We don't have to figure out what the rules are. We know them. Does this make sense? Again, IT doesn't own or control the subject matter experts that are there. So when you're trying to find your SMEs and get access to them, it's very, very difficult to get them into the project early enough. Enterprise architects work with the SMEs all the time. It's a continuous process. Only the business can competently assign values to the various business uses. Again, you can imagine, I'm over here on the business side and I'm trying to explain to an IT person who's a very smart person who's been trained well in IT but not well in data, what the business values of data are. And what do they think about data? It's stuff that goes in a database. That's all they're thinking about. Most of IT says, if they can gain access to the data, then my job is done. Again, reporting to IT has been expected because IT tends to own the methods that we use in that area. And finally, CIOs are slammed, absolutely slammed already in order to try and take on something new. Good luck. So again, it's an appropriate division of labor. It will help us reduce the translation requirements. It encourages the business team to learn the appropriate IT-derived methods that are there, and it encourages architectural and data reuse. The analogy that we use is pretty straightforward. You all have a couple of big buildings around here. Where are the restrooms in those buildings? In the most efficient place designed possible, in general. Okay? You don't put one here and one here and one here because that takes more time and effort to get the plumbing to the restrooms and the stuff we want to go out of the restrooms out of the building. Sorry to use that kind of an analogy, but it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So again, I'm taking an extreme position here, and I use this slide to sort of illustrate this. Around the turn of the century, we had something called a chief electrification officer. It was important because they had this new thing called electricity that they were bringing into organizations, and they were trying to figure out how to use it. We're in sort of the same place here. We still have chief electrification officers in some developing countries, but I'm not sure all roles are needed always. And it may be that at some point we change the educational system, develop the competencies around this, and that this function can evolve back into an IT function. But right now, I think to be safe, We need to overcorrect and address some of the challenges that we've had in that area. So again, to be a CDO, I want you to be dedicated solely to business asset leveraging. By the way, when we talk about data management, that sounds kind of passive, doesn't it? If I could rename DAMA, I would rename it DALA. DAMA, by the way, means female in some Romance languages, which just doesn't help us internationally a lot, right? They think we're some sort of porn site or something like that. If it's DALA, it would be the Data Asset Leveraging Association. I'm not king of the world, so I can't do that just yet. Again, unconstrained by an IT project mindset and reporting directly to the business. So that's my talk. We do have 2 or 3 minutes left. If anybody has any questions or you want to throw tomatoes at me or whatever. What do you think? Please.
A couple of questions.
I'm sorry. Jellica. There you go.
I guess the first one is about 10 years ago when we were into knowledge management, there was a push towards getting a chief knowledge officer, and you consider the chief data officer to be a modernization of that?
I would. And if you look at when we take data, we actually make a pyramid and say data is the basis, then we have information, and then we get to knowledge, wisdom, or whatever else we're going to put up in the top category and call it. Again, we have that same pyramid structure, right? So we have to have that foundation. I'm working with a couple of healthcare systems right now, and they're really excited about putting a chief BI officer in place. Well, guess what the BI officers are focusing on? The top of that pyramid, without understanding that they need to have the proper foundation there. So my solution to that is that data is the foundation of everything that is built on. That's where we need to start, and if we can get up to knowledge, that'd be terrific.
Big data projects usually have big price tags associated with them. I think one of the reasons why we don't do the big projects is you can't get payouts fast enough. So how is that the chief data officer and all that work getting funded at the companies that are doing that work?
Gosh, I couldn't have set that one up better myself. So the next book is called Monetizing Data Management, and I have a whole bunch of examples coming out in that area. I'd be glad to come back and talk to you about it. But there are ways of putting it in there and making it work. The one example that I did give was the increasing the measurable productivity of the 100 PhDs in chemical engineering. That was an objective study. Okay, very clear that we had increased their productivity in that area. It's very easy to show that kind of a payoff. And by the way, they said 25 million was theirs. I didn't get paid 25 million for doing that. I'd like to work on a percentage, I think. One more?
First of all, very insightful, thank you. And I'll talk to Suzanne about your connection information to, I think we have some more talking to do. But how do you go about getting people to understand that this foundational work has to be done, you have to invest in it, and just because we can't do it as fast as you might like us, that it's really worth doing. That's the hardest thing we have right now.
You ever heard the Abraham Lincoln quote, "I really apologize for not having the time to write you a short letter, so I'm going to write you a long letter"? This book is 88 pages. It's designed to hand to an executive at the beginning of a short plane ride and have them finish it by the end of that. That's my solution to it, thank you. Because we do need to have some very articulate arguments made in this area. People don't study data, so they don't know what they don't know. We've got to change that situation. We've got to fix the college and university problems. You guys are addressing it here with the competencies and things. And it's a big challenge. I'm trying to create awareness first of all, then we'll worry about the actual solutions. I think I'm out of time here. I'll give the bit back over to Jim, but I'll be here for a while. Okay.